Welcome to the Underdog Sniper Podcast. I am your host, MGCovers. This is episode 31 of the Underdog Sniper Podcast. Greatly appreciate you guys tuning in on a Monday morning. Lot to cover as always. Let's get to the outline of what we're going to talk about in this podcast. We're going to review NCAA football, NFL, some interesting stats and trends to talk about for NFL. And the third thing we're going to talk about, professional handicappers might not be as good as you think they are. And we're going to talk about when to change the model. I'm going to make a change to the NFL model and already know the direction we're going to go. And I'm going to walk you through my process and my mindset of how I'm actually doing that and why I'm doing it. And then lastly, we're going to talk about a concept in NFL that has gone 25-2 from the beginning of the year until now. I know that's hard to believe. And I'm actually going to share that with you under one condition. So we'll discuss that. So let's dive in and talk about let's review all the sports here. So let's pull up the old betting log here for NCAA football. See if we can scroll down here to actual plays for the week. And we ended up going 4-4 for college football. Not bad. I do have probably one regret, was not playing Wisconsin. Generally, I don't like to play teams that have to cover more than a touchdown. I think my line for that Wisconsin game was maybe minus 20 or something. And I think the books had them at it was more than a touchdown, maybe minus 8.5, somewhere in there. And they actually won that one on the road convincingly. But we had value via the model, positive line movement. Didn't play it, but in retrospect, maybe I should have. I generally don't like to make exceptions when I'm handicapping, but I felt real strong about that play. There was another situational angle that I felt good about in that particular game. So in retrospect, probably should have played that. That would have got us into the green for the week, but overall, still a very successful college football season. We are now sitting at 28-19, 9.83 units. That's basically 60%. So having a really solid college football season is kind of anchoring our fall sports so far. So still believe we have basically half a season. I think half the year is gone for college football. So it'd be nice to get that to 20 units. I doubt that's possible, but I still believe we have a ton of room for growth there as well. But yeah, super excited. Some really positive results. Let's go to soccer. We had one play for the week. You can see there, that was from the Columbia League. That got us a win. So that gets us, we actually went a hole briefly there and almost back to even with soccer at 4-4 minus 0.8 units. And we have all the big leagues now, Bundesliga, English Premier League, England Championship. We've already started playing them. La Liga, French League, all those leagues have now played, with the exception of Bundesliga. They've all played 8 matches. So now that's sufficient data. So we will have all of those lines out for clients and can start handicapping the big leagues. So we'll have a ton more volume. And that basically gives us about two months to hit our goal of 10 units for soccer. So no damage done there, even at 4-4 minus 0.8 units. Okay, let's move on to NFL, which we're going to talk about in great detail. Overall, 12-14 minus 1.59 units. We played all 3 dogs yesterday. Had Miami, Giants, and Detroit. We could have easily gone 0-3. We could have easily gone 2-1. That Miami game flip-flop back and forth, as well as the Detroit game back and forth. Got a late score for Detroit to win that one. And I think Detroit slightly undervalued. The line was plus 1.5, depending on that. We played it on the money line, plus 110. Minnesota's still a great team. They could have easily won that game, but I think Detroit's slightly undervalued in the marketplace. And probably the reason Minnesota was favored, they were at home, and of course they were 5-0 going into that game. But Detroit's definitely undervalued team. Giants were never in it at all. Had a quarterback injury there to Miami, so that kind of hurt us there late. But nonetheless, 1-2. Not ideally what we'd want to see with this particular model, but we're going to make changes to this. But overall, not bad. 12-14 minus 1.59. NFL has been a difficult sport to handicap, and I will give you an important point to talk about with NFL. Favorites in NFL are covering 55%. That's about 5% over the normal statistical property of NFL. So, in fact, last week, majority of sports books, I know BetOnline talked about this. They actually tweeted us out that they took a loss on football. And in fact, they said it was the biggest loss they've ever had in the history of NFL for them. So, again, you got a lot of public money coming in. The majority of people that play NFL play favorites. Favorites win. Books are going to take a loss. So I would be careful of someone that's bragging about having a huge winning season in NFL, because in order to have a winning season this year in NFL, up to this point, you would have had to have played heavy chalk. And that's basically a sports betting term, meaning you're playing all favorites. Favorites covering 55%. So that will come back down. You'll have dogs should catch up. But for now, you have favorites winning, which is another reason why we shouldn't be so alarmed at looking at NFL, because, again, the model's set up to play a lot of dogs. And I've talked about this before. If you have a model, and of course, like it's obvious. I was trying to think of a game this week where you had an obvious favorite. Let me think about this for a second. Can't think of it one off the top of my head, but it's easy if your model has, let's say if a team is -10, for example, the Redskins, the Commanders were probably, they were huge favorites over Carolina. They won huge. It was basically a blowout. So if your model had Washington -14, that's really not, that should be the norm for all models. But how to distinguish between an average model and a really good model is if that model can sniff out some underdogs, because that's what's going to differentiate that model from a normal model. If it can sniff out those money line dogs, which is so important, not only in NFL, but all sports. So we're going to make a change. We'll talk about that later in the podcast. But for now, not a whole lot of damage done at 12-14. Like I say, we could easily have been 2-1 with that. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about, and this kind of relates to losing as well. And again, I'm open about explaining to you guys what success looks like in this business. If you understand say a handicapper is 55%, that means 45% of the time they're going to have losing days. So if you look at a calendar of 30 days, that means they're going to probably have, 16, 17 winning days, and 13 or 14 days are going to be losing days. That's just the norm. And so what was interesting, there's two, I actually respect both of these handicappers, but this one handicapper, very knowledgeable. If I mention his name, you guys would know who he is. There's no need to mention the name on the podcast, but I'm just proving a point about losing. This is my 11th year in the business. I've had 2 losing seasons. So it is possible to have a losing season. This particular handicapper, he's down minus 12.1 units. Very knowledgeable, respected in the community, but he's down 12.1 units. And I'm assuming that's year to date. All right. Another handicapper who would be considered very knowledgeable with regards to college football. In fact, what's funny about this handicapper, I just had somebody send me this week a point that this handicapper made, meaning like, hey, is this good advice? It was actually good advice that this handicapper gave out. But this handicapper, they have a very successful YouTube channel, tons of followers. They are down minus 27.8 units. So my point is, it's a very difficult business. And just because, and what you have to be careful of when you're getting advice from somebody or listening to other handicappers, sometimes a handicapper, again, the majority of people lose in this business. And that's combining professionals, amateurs, etc. There was an old saying that only 3% of the people that wager on sports win. And there's no really a way to measure that. There's sports books that will confirm that, right? I've listened to podcasts with sports books directors. Most of them will confirm that. However, in my opinion, I think it's slightly higher than that. I think it's like 5%, but still nonetheless, 95% of the people that wager on sports lose money. And if you start to search around Twitter and social media, it doesn't feel like that, right? Because I remember the first time when I came on social media, brought the business online, I'd already been wagering on my own for, I guess, 6 years. it looked like everybody was winning, but in reality, it's just a facade because they're only going to promote the days that they win, or what they're promoting is not real. You can't verify it. They don't have a betting log, or they're not verified through, BetStamp or another monitoring service. So again, understand that the business is extremely difficult. You are going to lose. You will have probably a losing season. You will probably have years where you have a losing season with a sport, whether it's football, soccer, etc. All of that is normal. And even if you have a losing season, you can still be profitable. For example, if you look at our fall sports here, NFL, soccer, NCAA football, we're technically down in 2 of those sports, but overall, if you combine all 3, we're positive, right? Does that make sense? So again, very difficult sport, very difficult business. Never lose sight of that, and understand that everybody loses, even professionals. All right. Next thing I'm going to dive into is when to change a model, and I'm going to give you some examples. So I want to go back to, let's see, I think I still have it on the screen. Yeah, I have it on the screen right here. All right, so when to change models. Let's take a look at this. Now, week 4, this is another model here. So for weeks 5, 6, and 7, we were using the same model. Now, this particular model for weeks 5, 6, and 7, it lost a half unit for week 4. So the model we were using for week 4 had a tough week. It was down minus 2.45 units. But this particular model that we're using for 5, 6, and 7 was down half unit for weeks 4. So then you look at week 5, it basically went 5 and 5, lost a little bit of juice. It had a winning week last week, 1.99 units. And then this particular last week, it was down basically a unit. Now, again, you have to consider a lot of things when you're changing a model. The difficult part about NFL, and nobody talks about this, you have a very limited sample size, and you have to be careful, meaning if you back tested a full year with one model for one season, it might might be a winning model, and you might only have like a 50-game sample. And let me show you this too. Let's see if I can. Yeah, I don't think I can show this because it's going to. No, I can't show this. All right, but I'll read this out to you. All right. So I back tested. This is another model. We basically had 3 models. And let me say this is important. One thing I did at the beginning of NFL season this year was very smart. I anticipated, because I already knew the last 2 years of NFL was very difficult. I've had a winning season in NFL my entire career. I noticed 2 years ago the sport was changing. It became difficult. Still had to win a season. And last year we had the first losing season in my career for NFL ever. And a lot of it we've talked about already. Teams are playing. The sport's played differently, right? I don't want to talk about that in this podcast, but the sport is played differently. Teams play cover 2-man. They don't let you throw bombs. You have to sort of grind out possessions. If your opposing team kicks a field goal, that's basically a win for the defense. All right. The problem with NFL, you have a small sample size. This is one back test I did for 2024. It went 39 and 27, up 18.46 units. So that was like basically a 60-game sample. For 2022, it was 41 and 34, up 12.47 units. That was a 70-game sample. Now this year, it is 9 and 8, up 0.3 units. So again, that kind of moves in line with what we've seen with NFL, is that if your model set up to play dogs, for dogs to win, it's basically going to be even or even negative as we've gone so far with this current model. Now, I do want to show you this one. I can actually show you. This is the model. This is what I call an abstract model. And what I mean by abstract, again, I come up with all these terms because a lot of the education in sports betting a lot of these terms are new. For example, you'll hear the term top down, bottom up. Top down means you're using line movement. Bottom up means you're using model. And that was a term, actually, Spanky. A lot of you guys know him, and very public figure in the sports betting community. So a lot of these terms are new. So anyway, let's take a look at this particular model. Now, this is a model, an abstract model. And what I mean by abstract, I just came up with these two stats based on back testing. And I thought, hey, what if I use just these two stats to create a model? And so that's what I mean by abstract, meaning you're just coming up with something, maybe something you observe, something that you just think might work, and you want to investigate it further. So I sent it to Eric, one of my stat model partners, and said, hey, I think this could work. Here's my ideas on how we would create the line. He did a really good job of creating the way he calculated it. He did it a little bit differently than I would have done it, but it's been successful. And year to date, it's 17 and 15, up 8.33 units. And this is the actual model we're going to use. And the reason we didn't move in this direction sooner, we just didn't have sufficient data. So when we ran it the first week, it was in a whole minus 2.45 units. That was when I said, all right, I don't want to use this model because I'd rather use this other one that's proven where we have some data. Again, going back to the difficult part about NFL, you just do not have a big sample size. Even if you're using past years, that's still somewhat limited. Not a big sample size as a sport, say, in a Major League Baseball. And I'll go ahead and go through these plays. I can't show the left part, but I'll show you this, what you're looking at. So this past week, and it's interesting because it was completely different than our plays as well. So that first game that you're looking at there, where it says minus 15.5, our line, books line minus 10, that was the Buffalo game. So our line for Buffalo was minus 15, books line minus 10, odds 106. Not sure about the odds if those are correct. Maybe that was on the spread, 1.06 units. The next one there, the minus 14.5, that was Cincinnati. So we had Cincinnati minus 14.5 in this particular model. Books line was minus 5.5. And that odds there, plus 100. That one won. And then the one we lost, could have won that one. That was Houston, Green Bay. We had that line at minus 2. Books had it at 3. So obviously you play on the money line at plus 141, and that one lost. So it went 2-1 yesterday. So it's actually been done extremely well. And now that we have what I call sufficient data, and then 17 to 15 up 8.33 units, which is better than what we've done with the other model. And again, going back to, I've always said this, you're going to have to take risk in this business because, again, even at 17 and 15, that's only 32 game samples, less than 50. I've always said you have to have probably at least a 50 game sample, which we're not going to have. But again, you're going to take risk in this business. You take risk every day when you make a wager, even if you have a model, even if it's a proven model. So I still believe this is the direction to go. And again, going back to making a point about this previous model, again, week 4, if we used the model I was using for 5, 6, and 7, was minus 0.5 units. It had a losing week, and it's basically even in week 5. It had a winning week in week 6. It had a losing week in week 7. So the point is, with this particular model, it's only had one winning week out of weeks 4, 5, 6, and 7. So just basically using common sense there, we got another model that's been profitable. It only had one losing week, and that was that very first week. And to be fair, I think that was week 4. It had a winning week in week 3. We started calculating into week 3. It had a winning week in week 3, losing week in week 4, and it's had a winning week for 5, 6, and 7. So that's the direction we're going to go in. So again, a lot of it's just using common sense. But regardless of the decision that you make, you're going to have to take risk. And one thing too, I'm doing the same thing with NHL. You have to go into every season, and I've learned this by listening to Sharps. This is one area that I've grown drastically in, understanding how this business works. You never go into a season with the model used from last year, assuming that it's going to work. Sport changes. There's a paradigm shift. If you remember NHL, this happened in NHL, scoring went through the roof. They changed the rules. Teams were scoring crazy goals. We started playing overs. We started playing overs the next year. It didn't work. Same deal with NFL. Unders were cashing like crazy. I don't know what the record is, but it's completely different. It's not, it's leveled off some. So again, the lesson to be learned there is when you go into a season, anticipate that the model you're using might not work. Have a backup plan. Was very prepared this year. We had basically 3 models, and 2 of those 3 are profitable, albeit a small profit, but still profitable. But the direction is now we're going to go with this quote abstract model. Feel really strong about it. Wish I could share the details with it, because I think the way that I'm thinking of it, and that's the reason why it works, is I thought like, hey, this is what I saw in the sport. And again, if you maybe played football, if you played basketball, a lot of times using that knowledge that you have to like, hey, looking at it from the macro as opposed to looking at a box score and going, hey, this team had a higher field goal percentage. I'm going to use field goal percentage as my stat. Sometimes taking a step back and looking at the entire sport from the macro. Hey, I'm seeing this. I wonder if I put these 2 stats together, if this will work. A lot of time it does. Now, the final thing we're going to talk about, and this, again, when I tell you this, if you're skeptical and don't believe it, I'm totally cool with it. But we're going to compromise. This concept for NFL has gone 25-2. Now, again, if you hear that, that sounds like something a fraudulent handicapper would say, 25-2. But here's what I'm going to do. I can't tell you what it is because it's too valuable. I thought about revealing it on the podcast, but there's no way I can do it without getting something back in return. But this concept has gone 25-2 for NFL. And I'm probably an idiot for not even playing it. I know I have a ton of clients playing this. I will give this to you if you write a testimonial for the podcast. So here's what you do. If you've already written a testimonial for the podcast, you can write it on iTunes. You can write it on Spotify. Just screenshot the testimonial, and you could just make it basic. Don't make it too great podcast. At least make it look realistic. Hey, and really enjoyed listening to the podcast. I've learned a ton. MG is extremely legit. Thanks for the knowledge. Make it seem realistic. Screenshot that podcast and email it to me at mg@mgcovers.com. If you follow me on Instagram, you can send it to me there, and I will send you this concept that's gone 25-2. So that sounds fair enough, right? So anyway, greatly appreciate you guys tuning in to episode 31, and have a lot of content coming out this week. Talk to you guys soon. Peace.